From the TV30 studio, here's Jim Schneider.
Well, hi, and welcome to inFocus. So glad you could join us as we talk about, we're on election eve right now here on March 31st, and the day that we've been looking forward to is Election Day, Tuesday, April 1st, and it's been a neck-and-neck race, we're told, through pollsters down the stretch. We're going to be talking about many issues pertaining to Tuesday's election, what is at stake, and who are these candidates, what are some of the positions that they take and stand for, and certainly how that is going to impact you across the state of Wisconsin. We've got a number of issues that we're going to delve into tonight, and first of all, we wanted to welcome back Daniel Degner, who is the president of Wisconsin Family Council. Daniel, good to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Jim.
And also Sam Krebs, the legislative director for Wisconsin Family Action.
Thanks for the Jim tonight.
Good to have you both here. Just before we get to the election, I want to cover some of the things that have transpired over the last hours, really. First of all, here's a proclamation just issued marking today as the International Transgender Day of Visibility. This is a proclamation that's been issued by Governor Tony Evers, and very, very forthright in what he says here, basically recognizing all the contributions, according to him, as far as what transgenders have contributed to society here. He talks about fear of persecution and hate and violence and discrimination that's been launched against transgenders. And then he says, whereas the state of Wisconsin celebrates transgender and non-binary Wisconsinites, recognizes diversity as an asset to our communities, and reaffirms the state's commitment to ensuring that Wisconsin is a safe, inclusive, and welcoming place for all those who call it home. Now, therefore, I, Tony Evers, Governor of the state of Wisconsin, do hereby proclaim March 31, 2025 as International Transgender Day of Visibility throughout the state of Wisconsin, and I commend this observance to all our state's residents. Signed by Tony Evers. Daniel, your response to this?
Yeah, the first thing I just noticed just looking at this live is they couldn't even get the date right on the end part where they have Tony Evers' signature. But the second thing I think of is we are the day before a huge critical election here in Wisconsin. And what is the issue that the liberals in Wisconsin want to focus on? It's promoting transgender activism and transgenderism onto our communities and onto our state.
Mm-hmm. And it's coming full force. Sam, seems to contradict what voters decided this past November. People have been pretty fed up with the transgender agenda and its impact upon society.
Yeah, Jim, and the topic was, I say, a top 3 issue in November when President Trump was elected. And to go from that to just a few short months later, and they're still pushing it, they're still buying in. I think there's maybe a decision that's being made right now between the Democrat Party of, are they going to buy in fully to this? And I think that's evidence to say that they're going full bore on that issue.
And it doesn't stop with this proclamation, because also just today coming forth in a press release, this is from westpolitics.com, and that is Senator Radcliffe has put forth a release here as well regarding different pieces of legislation that is actually being introduced, like extending Wisconsin's non-discrimination laws to include transgender, non-binary people by prohibiting discrimination on the basis of gender identity or gender expression. Watch out, women in the restrooms here once again. We also have creating additional exception for individuals who are seeking a name change, conforming their gender identity, some legislation there, and then also putting forth a joint resolution to proclaim March 31 as International Wisconsin's Transgender Day of Visibility.
Yeah, well, we know first off that these bills are dead on arrival, but really what I think again is interesting is, and we'll go in this as we talk about some of these other bills later on, is time after time after time in the legislative hearings we heard this is really not impacting many people. We really need to just not harm these transgender people because there's not many of them. But at the same time, they keep coming out of the woodwork, and they keep trying to advance this agenda onto our state, but unfortunately, really onto our children.
Yeah, and onto our children. And Sam, this is something we're seeing in our school system. We're seeing it in many different aspects.
Yeah, Jim, I think to key in on part of the language from the governor, he talks about hateful rhetoric, and it's really sad to see that the truth is being portrayed as hateful rhetoric. To simply say that there are men and women, there are boys and girls, and to say that's hateful, that statement is hateful according to the governor and to his allies, is I think a concerning thing to see in a state of Wisconsin.
It is. Let's also just mention this. We, on a previous program, had talked about some assembly bills have been introduced. Assembly Bill 100, I've got that before me here. And this is dealing with the parental choice program based on the sex of participants. This would be public schools. Let me back up. Athletic sports that are in the public education, but also choice schools, and Assembly Bill 102 that also takes us onto the university level as well, as far as sports, athletics, basically saying that males have to play on male teams, females on female teams, and then also Assembly Bill 104, which we had discussed as well, prohibiting gender transition medical intervention for individuals under 18 years of age. All of these were taken up by the Assembly, Sam?
That's correct. All of them were taken up by the Assembly. All of them were passed by the Assembly. So even before that, Wisconsin Family Action, part of a sister organization, Wisconsin Family Council, had testified in favor of those bills. The Assembly passed them. They're now before the Senate. So the Senate has the opportunity to hold public hearings and then also have the option to vote on those and send them to the governor.
Do you anticipate the Senate's going to do that?
We'll see. I think there's a strong chance that they will, but we'll be there encouraging them to do so.
Okay, and again, Daniel, this is putting limitations on to, I guess, what would be societal norms that biological males play against biological males and biological females play against biological females.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I hear from many people in the grassroots and our supporters, they'll say, well, President Trump's in office, and it's praise God that he's there, praise God that he's making these executive orders that don't allow men to play in women's sports. And they ask, why do we need this legislation? Well, the key reason we need these pieces of legislation is to ensure that when President Trump is no longer in office, that we can ensure that biological men are out of women's sports.
Yeah. And friends, we have literally seen so many records broken in women's sports by biological males, women who have been denied medals, have been denied scholarships, have been denied record-breaking statistics as a result of men who are identifying as women encroaching into their sport and breaking records. We just conducted a radio program on this last week in which we see a high number of sports that have been impacted by this, and now even some of the Olympic teams are finding that they're going to start testing, genetic testing, to make sure that males are competing against males and females against females. So that issue is not certainly going away when we have the governor issuing a proclamation requesting upon you people in the state of Wisconsin, us people here as well, that are there to celebrate this Transgender Day of Visibility. Let's hit one other issue before we get to the election, and this is a piece of legislation introduced since you were both here last. It is Assembly Bill 105 relating to the distribution of certain materials on the internet. I know this is a bill of legislative importance to you.
That's right, Jim. That's actually probably our number one priority that we've been talking about with legislators this year. And the reason is that the bill, in essence, says that any explicit website, specifically pornographic websites, have to age verify that the people who are visiting their websites are not minors.
Yeah.
So let's make sure that, in essence, it keeps kids off of pornographic websites. And it's not just a simple checkbox of, yep, I'm 18, I get to go through. It actually have to prove that you are over the age of 18. And it's, as you mentioned, this bill was on the Assembly floor, it was voted on. I'm really proud to say that it was a bipartisan vote, that it was not just Democrat, Republican. There was over 70 people who voted in favor of the bill out of a 99 member assembly. So an overwhelming majority of people voted for this bill.
Daniel, young people have been victimized on the internet through these websites.
Oh, absolutely. And unfortunately, too, as we see what a bill like this does is it's a cultural change bill. It really impacts children at those young ages. But in the long term, we believe that if this bill becomes law, and because it had 69 votes in the state assembly, we really do believe the governor has the potential to sign it. But we believe this will have generational impacts in the areas of marriage and in family, and really making sure that men do not become addicted to pornography at young ages.
Okay, so Sam, what's the next step for this legislation?
Next step is on to the Senate. Senate has the opportunity to hear it. It's in the Mental Health Committee. We're talking with the Mental Health Chair right now to see what we can do to get a public hearing for the bill and speak to members both from the Republican and Democrat side about the importance of passing this bill to protect our children.
Okay, and a number of senators have already signed on, have become co-sponsors of the legislation.
That's correct. There's a few senators, and we're very thankful for them to put their name in support of that bill. I think there are others that will hopefully do the same.
We're going to move on to the election, and I know a lot of you are wondering and watching, certainly tired of all the commercials that you have seen, tired of all the flyers coming into your mailbox, tired of really the lies that we have seen really perpetrated through this campaign. But here's just some information to begin with. I received this from the State Elections Commission today, and just for a matter of record, they indicate here the state of Wisconsin has 3,844,614 active registered voters as of March 1, 2025. So just over 3.8 million voters in the state. Now, I also pulled down from the state their listing of county by county, all of those who have requested absentee ballots, those who have completed them, returned them, how many votes have been cast also by way of those who have voted absentee in person, how they call that kind of voting. I'm just going to flip to the back page here, and these are the numbers that the state is providing for us at the bottom here. The number of absentee ballots that have been returned, 644,800, and those in-person voting, 361,254. Gentlemen, we're talking over 1 million votes have already been cast in this election.
Yeah, one of the things we're seeing, especially these spring elections and with the amount of money being spent, is more and more people are being engaged, more and more people are voting. But what I would say to those of you that are considering voting that haven't voted yet is this election is so critically important for you to make your voice heard and for you to cast a ballot and vote by tomorrow at 8 p.m.
Sam, let me ask you this. We are seeing nationwide attention on this election. I mean, from coast to coast, we are seeing interest. Some, I think it was the New York Times that declared this one of the top elections that is being observed here across this nation. We are seeing the buzz in Washington, D.C. Why all the attention nationwide, and what happens on little tiny Wisconsin with 10 electoral votes? Why is this race matter so much across this nation?
Well, Jim, you hit on the nail on the head with that. I think my email inbox was flooded with emails from national news outlets saying Wisconsin is most important, Wisconsin is important. You look on any social media, Wisconsin is on everybody's lips right now if you're talking politics. And I think there's a few reasons. The primary one is because both sides see the Wisconsin Supreme Court as the avenue to either maintain the majority in Congress or to lose the majority in Congress and for the Democrats to take control.
Some would say that's just a conspiracy theory.
Not a conspiracy theory, I'll say. And it's very clear because you have the leader of the Democrat Party in I believe the Democrat House speaking in an interview saying, I believe this will be the race that will allow us to gain control of the House. One of the candidates, Susan Crawford, had a phone call, a Zoom call with donors saying, I will deliver 2 congressional seats to you in Wisconsin. So it's from a national perspective, this is a difference between President Trump's agenda being enacted over the next couple of years, not just in 2 years when we have House elections, but they're looking even sooner to move that timeline up to stop him as quickly as they can.
Friends, we're going to pause right now because what Sam pointed out here, Hakeem Jeffries, who is the House Minority Leader, virtually stated just what Sam said here, talking about the importance of this race as it relates to, well, flipping Congress, changing some of the districts in Wisconsin that are presently red to blue. Here's what he had to say.
In Wisconsin, that's a 50-50 race because we know Wisconsin's a 50-50 state.
Yeah.
And we have a strong Democratic candidate. Whoever wins is going to determine who has the majority in the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Why is that important? Because there are gerrymandered congressional lines right now in Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a 50-50 state, as I mentioned, but there are 6 Republicans and only 2 Democrats out of an 8-person delegation because the lines are broken.
Right.
And as soon as possible, we need to be able to revisit that and have fair lines. The only way for that to be even a significant possibility is if you have an enlightened Supreme Court. And so, I think that's an incredibly important race.
So from Hakeem Jeffries, what we need is an enlightened Supreme Court here in the state of Wisconsin. He's talking about gerrymandering that's going on. When we look at maps and we look even at the districts, don't we see that the darkest blue in Milwaukee County, the darkest blue in Dane County, and so much of the rest of the state is, there's quite a bit of red in there.
Yeah, and what I have to laugh when I see that is see Nancy Pelosi's successor saying, "Oh, look at how rigged these maps are." Well, who made those maps? Governor Tony Evers. It was a Democrat that made these maps, and now they're arguing that all of a sudden, now they're gerrymandered, now they're terrible. These were Democrat-made maps in the first place.
Wow. Your reaction to Hakeem Jeffries there?
Well, it's gerrymandering is a matter of opinion. I think it's a matter of politics, not necessarily a matter of fact. And I think they lay that Mr. Jeffries lays that out as a matter of fact, but it's more of a matter of opinion. And you're correct when you look at the maps. In order to structure the way to make more, let's say, Democrat seats out of Wisconsin, you would have to hub and spoke out of Madison, out of Milwaukee, which would violate the principles of drawing the maps in the first place. So I think they're looking for not necessarily a court that's looking at the facts, but a court that would look at what was most favorable to them as a party.
I want to be sure people caught the words you said. You used the term hub and spoke, meaning that you got that core nucleus there, but actually have spokes going out, taking sections of Dane County, sections of Milwaukee County out in order to put them with other, in red normally areas, in order to influence more blue into that area.
Yeah, and one of the things I would say is a concern too is one of the things that they would consider doing, and the U.S. Supreme Court actually struck down Evers' state legislative maps, is they made the state lines at the state level racially drawn. They focus at what racial guidelines and what makeups there were in order to draw a map that favored Democrats. But what this did is it actually hurt minority groups and it violated the Civil Rights Act. And so that would be a concern I would have with their plan. If they're trying to divvy up Milwaukee, are they going to violate the Civil Rights Act again?
So, friends, basically what is at stake here at this election is that there are those that are trying to take, like the 1st Congressional District, and hub and spoke it in order to make more blue into that area, taking out a path from another area to come into southeast Wisconsin and turn that more blue. And same with the southwestern part of the state of Wisconsin. Derek Van Orden's district is somehow turning that blue as well. And that's really what's at stake. And Hakeem Jeffries, they mentioned that. He sees that on the nationwide basis, and that's one of the reasons why Wisconsin is so very, very important. They want to flip a couple seats, and we know that majority in Washington, D.C. right now, Sam, in the House, is razor thin for the Speaker of the House, Michael Johnson.
That's right. It is hanging on a razor's edge, and every seat matters. I believe I saw a representative who had an appointment in the Trump administration actually pulled back in order to retain that seat. I think there's some special elections for some of those congressional seats, and any one of them we lost would be a significant blow to the majority that the Republicans currently have. Mentioning too the importance of the race, I think we talked on the congressional seats, but the second one I think is, the Democrats are looking for a way, how do we win back messaging after they lost in November on the national stage?
Right.
So I think this election has become a referendum, not just on Brad Schimmel and Susan Crawford, but it's become much bigger than that. They're test messaging Elon Musk. This is a referendum on Elon Musk and his Doge efforts. It's a referendum on President Trump and his first few months in office. So that's also a big factor in this too, is if they're successful in that message, you can probably expect to see that message moving forwards in other states and in Wisconsin in 2 years.
Let's talk about some of the issues before the court, or to come before the court, so our viewers understand what's at stake. And I say this is so important because there are many who just skip the spring elections, say, oh, it's just spring, not a nickel's worth of difference between candidates. Friends, there is much at stake in this election, so let's talk about some of the areas. Let's begin with abortion versus life.
Yeah, well, right now the state Supreme Court has heard a case that we're waiting to get a ruling on. Then there's another case that they're waiting to hear. And I'll talk about the one that they're waiting to hear. That case would make abortion a constitutional right in the state of Wisconsin. And so what is the Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin's argument and the liberals' argument on this? They're saying that, well, the state constitution says you have a right to life, to liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And where we would say, wait a second, you're saying that you have the right to life. They'd say, well, no, that's only for born people, but the pursuit of happiness therefore means that I can have an abortion. And we just have to laugh when we see some of those statistics, because time and time again, we see that marriage and motherhood actually brings women more happiness than singleness and especially the post-abortive woman.
Yeah, it makes you said laugh, but sometimes it makes us cry.
Cry,
as to where this is all going. When we talk about and we've seen many of the spots about the 1849 law. We've seen this with Brad Schimmel trying to target him. 1849 law, he's trying to stop, well, law is law, okay? We have to look at what that law states. But when I've seen even terms like the use of the word archaic, this archaic law, what's older than this law? Our state constitution. And yet we don't, we have no problem abiding or saying we're going to abide by the Constitution, which is older than this 1849 law.
Well, Jim, you're right again on that regard, because you look at a number of laws were passed when we became a state. Preventing murder or stealing or anything like that. Those are old laws. Are those just because they're old, do we throw them out? I think it's a pretty silly argument from my perspective. I think it's a little bit of red herring and a misnomer that just because it's old, we should toss it out. I think once again, does it have merit in law? Does it have grounding in what the Constitution says? So those are the arguments that really matter, but that's not the arguments that I would say liberal justices are wanting to talk about.
Yeah, and we, Wisconsin Family Council, we hosted a candidate forum at the Christian Home Educators of Wisconsin Conference, and that was very clear when the question was asked to Brad Schimmel, his view on abortion. What does the state law say? What has the legislature passed? Or what have the people passed through a statewide referendum? And the legislature, if they passed the law, what has the governor signed? Compared to, and unfortunately the Liberal candidate Susan Crawford did not come, but she's made it very clear in her campaign ads that she will do whatever it takes to advance abortion rights.
Yeah, it's been very evident. Okay, let's talk about another issue at stake, and that is male and female versus gender fluidity. Is that on the ballot here?
It is indeed, Jim. That is also on the ballot. I'll note that Susan Crawford is endorsed by Planned Parenthood. We very well know Planned Parenthood's reputation for abortions, but we may not know is that they're the second largest provider of gender-altering drugs in the nation. So by being endorsed by that organization, not are you saying that I'm fully embracing abortion, I'm also fully embracing gender-altering drugs. So when you look at court cases that might come before the court, you talked about that legislation that the Democrats introduced, the legislation that the Republicans have introduced. Both of those pieces of legislation, if they get signed or passed, would end up in front of the courts. They would be challenged by organizations such as the ACLU. So yes, those issues will come right before the Supreme Court at some point in the future. Parental
rights, is this at stake in this election?
Absolutely, and even just the bills we mentioned earlier, those Save Women's Sports bills, and even those bills that would ban transgender therapies and surgeries on minors, if those actually become state law, I do not trust a liberal activist Supreme Court to be able to handle that rightfully and justly. I think they would actually overturn those. But then even when it comes to parental rights, I'd say there's a huge case that we probably will eventually we will see at this court will decide at some point that will determine whether or not public schools can transition the student's gender without parents' knowledge or even their consent.
Yeah, that'll be coming up. Religious liberty, Sam, is that on the ballot here?
It is on the ballot. You talk about the opportunity for parents to raise their children, the decision to whether to homeschool their children or not. That's often with a religious tenor to it. Susan Crawford's husband has written a book that is fairly well known. It's been published nationwide, and in which the book calls for parents to take IQ tests, for the homeschool laws to be challenged in court. And if you see where that's going, if you challenge homeschool laws in court, if you have a justice whose husband is calling for the condemnation of homeschooling as a practice, you can kind of see where that court case might head.
We also see the matter of a case up in Superior as well with the Catholic group.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. So right now, thankfully, we have a U.S. Supreme Court that is going to take, and they took it unanimously, which we think is a really positive sign that they will overturn our state Supreme Court. But our current state Supreme Court has told the Superior Diocese, basically what they were doing is they were serving non-Catholic people through food pantries and different charities. And the state Supreme Court, the liberal members said, well, that's actually not a ministry practice, or that's not a religious practice because you're serving non-Catholics. And they told the Catholic Church what can be deemed religious and not religious. And even though we're not Catholic and our organization's not Catholic, that concerns us because if they can tell the Catholic Church what is religious and what isn't religious, they can also come to our churches and our Christian schools and also do the same.
Yeah, so that's really on the ballot. And really when it comes down to, we put everything down, we really have the rule of law versus judicial activism, don't we?
Yeah.
That's correct. I think the term originalism, so people who believe that the Constitution says what it says and that they're going to interpret it through that lens, versus people who say that the Constitution must be living and breathing. It must be a document that evolves over time, that what said in the past may not necessarily mean what you want to say now. So that's a very important distinction to make when you're looking at candidates and you're evaluating who should earn your vote come tomorrow.
Yeah. This is a sheet from iVoterGuide.com, and they have information on the candidates. We'll be putting their website up for you, but this is on Susan Crawford, and as they evaluate her and her positions, you can see a meter at the bottom of the screen here that shows that she is what they call a proven activist. When it comes to Brad Schimmel, they do it just at the opposite end of the scale, and they indicate that he is a proven originalist. I mean, he believes in the original intent of this document that we call the Constitution.
Yeah, and what I would say too with that idea of the activist versus originalist, I think is important for us to understand is when we look at the liberal Supreme Court, especially Susan Crawford gets on, is these activists will all be activists from Milwaukee County and Dane County. And compared to having judges from around our state, justices that uphold what the rule of law is, instead, we will get activists promoting what is good for Milwaukee County from their liberal perspective and Dane County from their perspective, and not upholding truly what is the rule of law in the Constitution.
Okay, and just as we're talking about some of the endorsements and things happening here too, this was pulled down from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, their action fund, and you can see they have given the Freedom from Religion Foundation, they want Susan Crawford on the bench. Earlier, we had also, you mentioned Planned Parenthood. Here is the Freedom from Religion Action Fund and Planned Parenthood advocates mobilizing the Wisconsin Supreme Court vote and talking about how even giving contributions from organizations to help propel her into office. Taking a look at these endorsements, again, these are coming from iVoterGuide.com. Susan Crawford, Emily's List, Barack Obama, Planned Parenthood Advocates of Wisconsin, Wisconsin State AFL-CIO, Citizen Action of Wisconsin PAC, Indivisible, Jewish Democratic Council of America, the American Federation of Teachers, Wisconsin, the WEAC, Wisconsin Democrats, WisDems, Brad Schimmel shows the Conservative, National Rifle Association, Donald Trump, Ron Johnson, Brian Stile, Tom Tiffany, Glenn Grothman, Derek Van Orden. The list actually goes on and on when you look at their websites, especially when they look at the aspect of law enforcement. Your comments on that?
It's pretty clear that Brad Schimmel is law enforcement's candidate, but what really concerns us is the Planned Parenthood endorsement, but also that Freedom from Religion Foundation, their action fund endorsement. And what to me really stood out was they weren't endorsing Susan Crawford, at least for what they could put on paper or put out publicly what they think she'll do. But I'm sure they definitely believe she'll support their agenda. But what they highlighted was that Brad Schimmel, and he was our state attorney general, he had a volunteer chaplain program for those that may go through a traumatic event in law enforcement and part of the DOJ, where they could see a chaplain to pray for them and minister to them if they had need. And their big thing was, how dare Brad Schimmel do this? And that was the reason they endorsed Susan Crawford. So my question would be, if they're going to have that sort of view and they're going to endorse Susan Crawford on that reason, our pastors in our local communities, can they be police chaplains? And is that what Susan Crawford and the Freedom from Religion Action Fund will go after next?
Okay, so the liberal justices on the court have backed Susan Crawford. The conservative ones have backed Brad Schimmel. We also have this from the Shepherd Express that came out not too long ago, and they focus in on abortion itself. And they say the question is whether Wisconsin is going to live under an 1849 law that bans abortion without exceptions for rape, incest, and health of the mother. Crawford supports a woman's right to control her body. Her opponent, Brad Schimmel, supports extreme anti-abortion positions.
Well, Jim, going back just a couple minutes, we talked about originalist versus an activist. So when you read that, it's very clear Susan Crawford is an activist. She's laying out, and I live in Dane County, so I get all of the ads. She's laid out a marker. I am going to defend abortion. I'm going to defend your right, even as one of the ads was for a child for someday to get an abortion. versus the public statements that candidate Schimmel has made, that he will interpret what the law states. And so even in that article, they say extreme positions, but the extreme position is to say that I will interpret the law to apply to abortion what the legislature and the governor have passed, and that's what I will apply, versus marking down a marker saying I will defend abortion no matter what.
Yeah, and something I just want to highlight too, if you look at that document, so one of the things they want to highlight, and liberals do this all the time, is they'll say, well, the health of the mother. But again, what they're trying to do is it's this language brought in from Roe versus Wade that talks about mental health, even financial health. And I'll just share our own story and our own family's testimony. But when this Statute 9404, the so-called 1849 law was in effect, my wife had an ectopic pregnancy. And so what that means is the baby was stuck in her fallopian tubes and unfortunately passed away. And we had the baby removed after it passed away. But there was not 1 second when we were under that law in Wisconsin where there was any question of whether or not we could care for my wife's health as the mother in that ectopic pregnancy. But if you would listen to these liberal ads or you would read things like that, they would make it seem like these sort of laws and these sort of politicians, that they're trying to kill women like my wife. But it's truly the opposite could not be more true.
You know, my mind goes back to a previous inFocus program we did last season in which we had a woman come on that had an appointment with Planned Parenthood on the day that the Dobbs decision came out. And as she was getting ready for her appointment, she was contacted, sorry, we can't do that abortion, but we'll provide a way. And so they were giving her funding, whatever, to get down to Illinois in order to have an abortion there. And as she's driving down there, she connected with Eyewitness for Life and just felt, I can't do this, and turned around and came back. And she is so glad she saved the life of that unborn child, now her daughter. I believe it's daughter. But
yeah, praise God.
Yeah, it was exciting to hear. Well, that's just one of the races on the election. Supreme Court, a very critical race on the ballot Tuesday, April 1. We'll have some more info in just a bit, but there's other things as well on the ballot. Here's another statewide office, Superintendent of Public Instruction, and this again from iVoterGuide.com. We have Brittany Kinzer. Shows her as being a moderate, and Jill Underly, who is the incumbent, shows her as being liberal on the meter there. They have connections to endorsements and everything else. Before we move on to others, just give us your assessment of this race here for Superintendent of Public Instruction.
Well, Jim, I think this is one of the most fascinating races in the last decade of Wisconsin history, because you have a far left candidate, Jill Underly, who really is on fire from all sides. The left doesn't like her because she watered down educational standards. She quite literally took test scores and artificially raised them to make herself look better. Well, it didn't rub well with the educational establishment. And then you have, the more conservative side of the argument who looks at her positions on school choice, to which she just recently, I think this past week, said, I want to get rid of school choice completely. And so she's not made any friends on either side with those kinds of decisions, has made the Department of Public Instruction even more political than it has been in the past, picking fights with the legislature. So you have Brittany Kinzer, who's a moderate, coming in saying, I'm a different option. I'm here to be a bridge builder. I'm here to work with people. I'm here to not take educational options away. I'm here to enforce educational standards, empower parents, and to protect educational choice.
Let's educate kids.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So that's the choices on your ballot tomorrow for State Superintendent of Public Instruction. There is one other item that is on everybody's ballot tomorrow, and that is a constitutional amendment. And this is, we'll put the wording up on the screen for you, but it's dealing with photographic identification for voting. Shall Section 1M of Article 3 of the Constitution be created to require that voters present valid photographic identification verifying their identity in order to vote in any elections, subject to exceptions which may be established by law? Yes or no? So, gentlemen, what does a yes vote mean on this? What does a no vote mean?
Yeah, so with this case, and some people wonder as well, isn't voter ID currently state law in Wisconsin? And basically, the reason behind this and the heart behind this is there's concern in the state legislature of what happens if there's a very liberal activist court that takes over. Would they get rid of our state voter ID? And I would say that they have a very fair concern, considering Susan Crawford, as an attorney, actually fought against the voter ID law when it became a law here in Wisconsin. So a yes vote means that the state legislature cannot override our state voter ID law, but it also means that a Supreme Court cannot overturn our state voter ID law. So it enshrines in our Constitution. And so a yes vote means that voter ID will remain in our state constitution.
Okay, and looking at iVoter Guide, they indicated that a conservative vote is for a yes vote on that. A liberal vote is a no vote on that constitutional question. There is, friends, we're going to put up a couple websites. This though is Wisconsin Faithful has put together a voter information publication that tells you the candidates for Supreme Court, who they are, their current position, their judicial philosophy, their experience, some of the people who are endorsing them, some of the notable cases or issues that they've been involved in. This is available at wisconsinfaithful.org, wisconsinfaithful.org, and the other guide is ivoterguide.com. These don't tell you who to vote for, but certainly give you information on the candidates. You can assess them, follow links, and gain the information so you can cast a prayerful vote. I would like to just also mention, in addition to this, there's all the other local things that are happening. Sometimes it's school board members, judicial seats, mayor's offices, all different kinds of things.
Yeah, and we often get phone calls from people that are wondering of what's on my ballot or who should I vote for. And the first thing I'd recommend is do not go to your polling place without knowing who is on the ballot.
Yeah.
And so the first place to go is to myvote.wi.gov. And at myvote.wi.gov, you can just go there and click and see as what's on my ballot right there in the middle. And if you click on that, you can type in your address information, and then you can see what your sample ballot is. The other thing I would say too is if you have questions about, I'm not sure about the candidates, there's things that you can research online, but you're also always welcome to reach out to our office at 888-378-7395 to ask any questions, or if you need any help with finding your where you vote, getting a hold of and how to use myvote.wi.gov, or if there's any other way that our team can help you, we want to be able to help you.
Friends, you probably saw those other blue buttons on that website. And there's a phone number for Wisconsin Family Council, 1-888-378-7395. You can, if you've got questions, you can call and ask them. But the myvote.wi.gov, you'll find many buttons there. You'll find out, where you go and cast your ballot, what's on the ballot, register to vote. The voting absentee by mail, that's over and done with. And you've got a wealth of information that's available right there. I want to also mention that there are, I think, 120 different referendum questions all across the state of Wisconsin. A lot of school referendum, some are other municipal type things, but the only way one's going to know really is going to that website.
Yeah, and the one thing I would say too is if you're like me, so I voted absentee by mail, and part of it is, and it's just new role, I don't necessarily know where I'll be on election day. I can be running all over the state. And what I love about myvote.wi.gov is I can actually track my ballot. So what I would recommend, if you have voted early by mail, go to that website right after this show's over, or go tomorrow morning and ensure that your vote has arrived at the clerk's office. If it hasn't arrived at the clerk's office and it's not being counted, show up to your clerk's office to figure out how to make that correction and make it right, but also make sure that your vote does count.
Okay, and that was the far right blue button that was on the website. Friends, we'd like to open our phone lines tonight and take your phone calls. Maybe you've got some questions. Maybe you're confused about something on the ballot, or about the candidates that are on the ballot. Maybe you have got questions, or maybe you said, I've early voted and this is who I believe people ought to vote for. Who are you voting for, and why is this important to you? Our phone number tonight, 414-935-3030. 414-935-3030. That's our number for inFocus tonight. You may also reach us toll free at 1-800-733-8830. That's 1-800-733-8830. Friends, do you find the spring election to be a vital election? Have you participated? Are you planning to be at the voting booth tomorrow? Pick up your phone, give us a call. We've got open phone lines right now pertaining to the election. 414-935-3030 is our number, or toll free at 800-733-8830. Sam, frankly, a lot of people are just tired of those ads coming in.
I commiserate with them. Everywhere you look, whether it's on your phone, your TV, your mailbox, you get them everywhere. And so people want to take a breath. I think, thankfully for this year, you get to take a breath after this election, kind of, because right after this, people, you may not see it, but people will be gearing up for a spring election in 2026 for another Supreme Court justice on the ballot. So enjoy your peace and quiet for this summer and fall, because you'll be hearing from those election ads once again in the new year.
Yeah, and in that 2023 election that was similar to this, it was the largest spending ever raised for a state Supreme Court race in all of American history, and that was about $50 million. Well, this race surpassed that already in February, and just on my way here, I saw that they've tracked at least $104 million that has already been spent in this race. But as Sam mentioned, especially if the conservative candidate Brad Schimel wins, we are going to be in the same exact spot a year from now to determine who is the majority, whether it's the conservatives or the liberals, and we can expect a lot of money being back in the race.
Yeah. Critically important. Friends, right now, we've got open phone lines. Who are you backing in the Supreme Court race? And maybe just a sentence as to why. Our phone number here is 414-935-3030. 414-935-3030. 800-733-8830. That's 800-733-8830. We've got several open lines that are available right now for you to get through to us and recognize the critical nature of this election. The polls open Tuesday morning at 7 o'clock a.m. They will stay open until 8 o'clock p.m. or until the line finishes. As long as you're standing in line, your vote will count.
Yeah.
So you can stand in line and make sure that even if it's 8 o'clock, you're in line there to vote, to be sure that you are casting your vote. Just stay in line in order to have that opportunity. Friends, we'd like to hear from you tonight. Again, 414-935-3030. Toll free, it's 800-733-8830. The eyes of the nation are watching this election. They're watching the state of Wisconsin. Sam, there are those, no doubt, who are saying, is it worth it?
Well, you actually read my mind, because I was just thinking about that. If you look back in history, look just back at 2019, that Supreme Court race, just out of curiosity, I went back and looked at it, was decided by 6,000 votes. Think about that. That is a minuscule number, and you consider millions of people who might vote had the opportunity to vote. Out of, you said 3.8 million could vote. 6,000 was the difference between one justice and a different justice.
Oh.
The polls that I've seen and just the general feeling that we've gotten from people that we've spoken to say this race could be just as close. And it comes down to who's willing to turn out, who's willing to come out and vote, who's willing to show up on election day. And there are going to be challenges. You look up north, there's been snowstorms, there's been ice storms, bad weather, things can pop up where you have a school thing going on or a work thing. All those interfere with, a spring election. But you could be one of the 6,000 who made the difference between originalists or activists or educational options or other things like that.
Friends, you got to think about the next generation. You got to think about the next generation, the children that are growing up, and what kind of state will they have. Let's go to the phone lines, 414-935-3030, and let's begin with Willie in Wauwatosa. Willie, you're on the air.
Hi. I was just listening to the program on VCY on TV, and they gave a couple of websites where we could get all the information of the candidates running. Can you give me that again? I kind of missed that.
Sure. WisconsinFaithful.org. That's WisconsinFaithful.org.
Okay.
And the other one is iVoterGuide.com. That's the letter I, iVoterGuide.com.
And the Wisconsin Faithful, is that the full word of Wisconsin or just WI?
It is the full word of Wisconsin.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Yep. And I was just going to say, since she's from Wauwatosa, there was a huge school board race in Wauwatosa that came to our attention. And it is just crazy to see what the left is doing, especially in a community like Wauwatosa. There is a school board candidate running on your ballot who is a polyamorous. And so even many people will be like, what does that even mean? So this is a guy who lives with another couple and his wife, and they're intermingled as a couple with the four of them. Wow. But it's just absolutely crazy. These people are running for even local office here in Wauwatosa.
Wow.
Ooh.
Yep. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your call here tonight. Friends, our phone number here is 414-935-3030 or 800-733-8830. Let's go next to Rick, who is calling from Waukesha. Rick, you're on the air.
Yes. I just wanted to comment that your guests haven't said anything about Act 10, and the activist judges, they want to overturn Act 10. So I'd like to hear what your guests have to say about that.
Great question. Thank you for the call.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. I appreciate the phone call. Yeah, you're 100% right. Act 10 is one of those issues that could be before the Supreme Court. There's already a lawsuit that has been filed to take that away in Dane County. The Dane County judge said, we're going to take parts of Act 10 away. That is working its way up towards the state Supreme Court. It's not there currently, but it will be there very soon. So you're 100% right. And we have looked at that. There's organizations that have looked at the cost of that. I think the MacIver Institute is a really good organization who's looked at, has done a very good job keeping up with how much has Act 10 saved the state of Wisconsin and you as a taxpayer. I think that number last time I saw was well over $30 billion.
Again, billion with a B, not
it's hard to comprehend. I could never think about what that means in terms of money, 30 billion. But when you break that down to every man, woman, and child in Wisconsin, that's tens of thousands of dollars over the course of your lifetime that has been saved because of the Act 10. So if that goes away, then those costs go right back onto you, the taxpayer.
Yeah, and Wisconsin Institute on Law and Liberty, they have a calculator where you can put in your own home address to see how much it would cost you if Act 10's overturned. I looked it up in my own house, and it was $1,001 per year.
Wow.
But another thing that's crazy with this too is, again, this is where we see the liberal activist Susan Crawford at it again. When she was an attorney, Susan Crawford was an attorney who actually sued to overturn Act 10 when it was a state law. And when she was asked, would she recuse herself from Act 10, she said, well, I will only recuse myself from the specific legal arguments I made, which is basically a way of saying that she probably will not recuse herself on these cases.
Her vote would count.
Yeah.
Wow. Let's go to, let's see, we've got Anthony in Milwaukee. Hi, Anthony, you're on the air.
Oh, hi, Jim. How you doing? Thank you for having these two guests on. I like to say that I'm going to vote conservative. But what I want to know is that I can't explain. But thank you anyway.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for your call here tonight. 414-935-3030 is the number, or 800-733-8830. Let's go next to Alan in Racine. Hi, Alan, you're on the air. Good evening, Alan, you're on the air.
Yes, I would like to know a little bit more about the two women running for, I think it's Secretary of Education.
Yes, Superintendent of Public Instruction, the two candidates there.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sam, do you want to take Brittany Kinzer and I'll take Jill Underley?
Sure. So I'll talk to you a little bit, Alan, about Brittany Kinzer. So she's a relatively newcomer to the political scene. Based on her track record, she's introduced herself to the political scene as a moderate, as a Blue Dog Democrat. But she said that she's willing to work with the legislature, try to bridge that gap between the legislature and the governor on education. She has a background in teaching. She has background in charter schools. And she has the backing of a number of organizations, both liberal-leaning and conservative-leaning. Seems to back up her bona fides that she is a candidate who's looking to bridge that gap.
Okay.
Yeah, and Jill Underley, so she is the incumbent in this race. So Jill Underley is endorsed by the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. She served in this office for the last 4 years. She was elected 4 years ago. But one of the things that we often hear in Madison is often there's a lot of controversy over her leadership, and she doesn't necessarily have a lot of support even from liberal groups, but especially not from conservative groups. Last week, she said in an interview with PBS that she wants school choice completely eliminated around the state of Wisconsin, but we've seen her as an activist, especially when it comes to the transgender issues in our schools. And then she's even, when it comes to our school test standards, she has lowered those standards twice in order for her to look better when it comes to those state standardized tests.
At the expense of children?
At the expense of children, very unfortunately.
My.
Yeah.
Thank you for the call.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good night. And 414-935-3030 is our number, 414-935-3030. We've got Kathy as our next caller. Hi, Kathy, you're on the air.
Hi, I just turned it on a little while ago, but what I noticed, I haven't watched the program, that I don't think the subject of boys going into girls' showers, sports, bathrooms is brought up enough. I've called people last fall about the Democratic Party, and I know that Susan Crawford is on the same page with the Democratic Party. And I know there's a lot of things going on, but this, I think, is beyond everything.
Yeah.
Okay?
Well, one of the
Thank
things,
you.
Kathy, one of the things you missed at the very beginning of the program tonight, we mentioned that today, or today's day of March 31, 2025, Governor Evers, as the head of the Democratic Party here in Wisconsin, has declared today to be an international transgender day of visibility. So the governor of Wisconsin is trying to push this even more. Democratic Party members have now introduced pieces of legislation to take this even further upon pushing it down the throats of people across the state of Wisconsin.
I appreciate that information.
Yeah. Thank you for calling.
Thank you.
And that was one of the things that the bills for Save Women's Sports, they also did address, of making sure that those locker rooms were protected to keep men out of those women locker rooms.
So friends, we have a little bit more time to take your phone calls tonight. If you have questions pertaining to the election, regarding the candidates, the issues that are at stake, the constitutional amendment, please make sure you look over that entire ballot. Don't just go and vote for one office. The constitutional amendment is there, and that is asking the question that should we enshrine it in our Constitution that would require a photo ID to vote across the state of Wisconsin. And as was mentioned earlier, some say, well, it already is the law. Well, it is, but we're finding laws are being challenged before a activist Supreme Court, and that also could be thrown out the window. And so this is an opportunity to enshrine it in the Constitution. And I find it interesting, Sam, that if somebody goes to the library and they want to get a Curious George and the Man with the Yellow Hat, guess what? They've got to show a photo ID in order to check a book out. If they want to get rid of waste motor oil, they have to show a photo ID at the yard, the recycling yard, whatever it may be, in order to get rid of waste motor oil. Somebody needs a medication like a Sudafed. They have to show the pharmacist that photo ID as well. People don't have a hard time getting a photo ID. They show it for what they need, whether it be benefits that come to them or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and I will point out too, a research firm, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, did a study on does voter ID affect turnout? Does voter ID suppress turnout? That's something we hear very often from the people who would be opposed to it. There was no suppression of turnout in the last decade of Wisconsin having voter ID, none at all. And so you couple that with the fact that voter ID has broad-based public support. I would say 78% consistently across the nation and in Wisconsin have said, we like voter ID. Voter ID is an effective tool to make sure that when I go to the polls, you're checking that I am who I say I am. And so putting that in the Constitution is something that would enforce that in a way that the legislature, governor, or Supreme Court could not affect.
Yeah. And I want to talk to a question that I'm sure some listeners have. I had a phone call from a pastor on the way here, but some have asked me about the last kind of sentence there of what that means, because it talks about on the referendum about exceptions for what's prescribed already in law. And so some people say, wait a second, does that mean that it would potentially get rid of voter ID? But what that's doing is that's addressing issues for those that are shut-ins or those that aren't able to go and vote, and already where they're not required to show voter ID as it is currently in our state law.
Okay, let's go back to the phones. We've got Ryan calling from Hales Corners. Hi, Ryan, you're on the air.
Well, hello. Great show. I'm really glad that you're able to address some of these referendums and the things that are going to be on the ballot, because sometimes they're just so vaguely worded you really can't understand. But my question is this, sir. In curiosity, with the Supreme Court and, the voter ID referendum, does the Supreme Court also then have the ability to override or redetermine the Second Amendment of the state of Wisconsin?
Okay, gentlemen, do they have that ability? Because it's already written in the Constitution.
Do they have the ability? From my perspective, no. But once again, you're dealing with people who are activists, and so when you think about you look at them and you say, okay, where's the boundaries? Where do you draw the line? When you say they're an activist, that line moves based on what benefits them the most. And so I think that's something to keep in perspective is when you talk about an activist, they will blow with where the winds go sometimes or where they feel like they want to go. So it is something to keep in mind that I'll point out we have a religious liberty we talked about issue that before the Supreme Court. You look at during coronavirus, it was a difference between one justice whether or not churches could freely worship or not. And so you think that's a First Amendment issue. That's very clear and very plain that you shall not infringe the right of people to worship.
Yeah.
But it was one vote that was a decision between whether or not you could go to church and worship or not. So something that seems so plain, maybe not so plain.
So do I understand correctly that the amendment that's on the ballot in regard to voter ID would kind of be the same as the Second Amendment in the state of Wisconsin to bear arms, that it would have to be a constitutional law?
Yeah, it's enshrined as part of the Constitution.
Yep. And what we've seen with these liberal activist judges is what they're basically saying is, you know what, unless it's clearly in the Constitution, we're just going to make whatever we want it to say. And so that's why conservatives continually put these referendums in front of us to make sure that it's very clear of, no, it says black and white in the Constitution, you cannot do this.
Sir, we're out of time, but thank you so much for the call tonight.
Thank you.
Sure. Appreciate you and all the other callers coming in tonight. Friends, I do want to get some information to you here this evening. Again, polls open at 7 o'clock in the morning. They're closed or open until 8 o'clock in the evening. If you want to see what's on your ballot, this is what's so critical, Daniel talked about too, go to myvote.wi.gov, myvote.wi.gov, and you click on what's on my ballot. You click on that middle blue button, and then you put in your address, and voila, your sample ballot comes up. You can see what offices you're voting on, what the issues are, and the referenda question, anything else that may be on your particular ballot. You also find there where do I vote, track your ballot, register information, etc. For candidate information, you can go to wisconsinfaithful.org, wisconsinfaithful.org, and ivoterguide.com. ivoterguide.com. If you have questions on any of these issues, reach out to Wisconsin Family Council. They'll be at their phones tomorrow as well, 1-888-378-7395. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Jim.
A very critical election that's before us, and it all gets underway tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And tonight, Daniel Degner, Sam Krebs with us this evening. And friends, it's going to boil down to who is going to show up at the polls and cast a vote. Has your vote been cast? Have you done it by absentee? Have you done it by early voting? If not, keep your feet walking to the polling place between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. We at VCY encourage you to be informed and to vote prayerfully. God bless you, friends. Thanks for joining us tonight on inFocus. Good night.